But, like, he was in the original meeting, not the ones in the Third Age, obviously, since he died. And, you know, Sauron melted his face off. But... Hello, welcome to my channel, and welcome to my YouTube project, Makeup and Middle-earth Monday, a show where I do a makeup look and talk about a topic from the Tolkien Legendarium. Some quick housekeeping again this week. I wasn't expecting to breach 50 followers in, I guess, basically what amounted to under a week after filming the last episode. So that's amazing. I really can't believe that I think I'm at like 55 followers now. I can't believe there are that many of people who like actually want to sub to this, because I cannot stand the sound of my own voice. So the fact that y'all actually like this show is amazing, and I really appreciate it. So Sten is gonna be on the hunt for memes, and I will post another announcement on my Facebook page, but we'll be doing that video sometime in March because we're actually in the middle of like moving. So Sten's moving out, and then my fiance is moving in, and I needed to give some time to actually get that done. So it's looking like March. If you have a meme of your own that you would like featured, you can actually send that to my email, samletbird@gmail.com. Just title it meme review so that I can keep them categorized, and if you want to be credited, just put like your info in the body of the email, and we'll see about adding them into the reaction video. Today's topic is Elrond. This got the most votes after the Valar one, my last Facebook poll, so I decided to go ahead with this one because, like, who doesn't like Elrond? He's a really interesting character, and he's been around for quite a while and done, like, a lot of really cool things. So I decided to go ahead and just do this week, and then I'll post another poll before we pick our next topic. Today's makeup look is also from LARP, but it is actually from a game that I haven't been to in a minute, so I thought I'd do it for nostalgia's sake. This is actually the PC I used to play at this game. He's like a wild elf, but he's suffering from like a blood curse, so he can't derive nutrients from people food. He looks kind of edgy, but like he internally is kind of cottagecore, because he likes to bake even though he can't eat any of it. Anyway, let's get started. So, Elrond is featured in Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and The Silmarillion. In the Peter Jackson movies, he's played by Hugo Weaving. He is the Lord of Rivendell, and he's the bearer of one of the Elven Rings of Power. He's also actually half-elven, so he's half-human, half-elf, kind of. We'll get to that. He was a renowned healer and a skilled warrior who led multiple armies into multiple battles. We'll see if these stay in. He's actually an interesting example of someone who could kind of like multi-class in Lord of the Rings, which is not super common because he was good at a lot of different stuff. He was a lore master, and he was a healer, and he was a really competent warrior, so he had so much time. He studied lore and the blade. He was described as one of the most incorruptible leaders of Middle-earth, and in addition to that, he was on a very short list of people who were actually capable of resisting the power of Saruman's voice, which I haven't talked about really, but Saruman the White was actually known for having like a very hypnotic voice that he was able to use to control people, like King Theoden. I think the way that Tolkien handles half-elven characters is actually kind of cool, because instead of like not really fitting in to elves or men culturally, they actually get to choose if they want to be counted like among the men or among the elves. So Elrond obviously chose to be one of the elves, so he's completely accepted among them, and is just an elf lord who happens to have some, you know, alternative parentage, I guess you could say. I do feel bad for Elrond though, because his daughter Arwen obviously chooses a mortal fate so that she can marry Aragorn, and Elrond's twin brother also actually chose to become mortal. As I said, we'll get into that a little later. Elrond was described as ageless. He appeared neither young nor old. However, one could see in his face the memories and experiences of thousands of years. He looked venerable, both like an old king, a wise wizard, and an experienced warrior in his prime. Like most Noldor elves, he had dark hair, and he had gray eyes that, quote-unquote, shone like starlight. Elrond actually means star dome, or in the context of like a cavern with like stars in the ceiling, kind of. And he was born really, really late into the First Age, like pretty much, I think probably almost less than 100 years left of the First Age is when he was born, and he was actually born in a refugee camp. His parents, Eärendil and Elwing, were refugees from two different elven cities that had been sacked, and the refugee camps is the Havens at Sirion. And Eärendil was there after the destruction of Gondolin, and Elwing, Elrond's mother, was there after fleeing from Doriath after the Sons of Feanor had sacked it, trying to get their hands on the Silmaril that her parents had, and in the process they essentially like killed her entire family, and she ran away to the Havens of Sirion. This is in Beleriand. This is pretty much the point in First Age history where things are really desperate. Morgoth has pretty much defeated the majority of the elven cities here. There's a couple holdouts, but for the most part, things are looking like really, really dire for the elves, and for like those of them who aren't allied with Morgoth, because, you know, Morgoth has allies among the men, unfortunately, and I think some of the dwarves. There's like a quote at some point during one of the battles that was basically like the only race participating in the battle that wasn't like split in loyalty were the elves. So the elves were the only ones who were really completely 100% against Morgoth. So Elrond's parents, Eärendil and Elwing, they actually had twin sons, Elros and Elrond. The twins were 6 years old when the Sons of Feanor actually came to attack the Havens at Sirion, looking for the Silmaril that their mother Elwing had managed to escape from them with when they killed her whole family. This happens when Eärendil is actually away, because he's been sailing around the coast trying to find his parents. So the remainder of the living Sons of Feanor actually get killed during the time when they come to sack the refugee camp at the Havens. So there's only two of them left alive by the time they actually capture Elros and Elrond. They're the two eldest Sons of Feanor, Maedhros and Maglor, and they capture Elwing's sons, and there's really nothing she can do about it because they're gonna kill her. So she literally like jumps into the sea to escape from them. The Vala Olmo, the Vala of the Waters, actually turns her into a seabird to like help her escape, and she flies to actually find her husband's ship. And don't worry, she gets there and she stops being a bird. This isn't Swan Princess. But she makes it to her husband's ship, and they get out of Dodge, basically. So Maedhros and Maglor take Elros and Elrond prisoner, and when they're like 6 years old. And this sounds really bad because the Sons of Feanor have killed like a lot of people and have done like a lot of really shady shit trying to get these Silmarils back. And indeed, at first it looks like pretty grim for these kids, because Maedhros and Maglor don't want to murder children, but they're bound by this oath. And I don't think I've really gone into it a whole lot in previous episodes, and I'm sure I'll do a Sons of Feanor episode eventually, or either that or like a complete Travels of the Silmarils episode, maybe. But oaths in Tolkien are very binding. There are finite consequences if you break an oath. I guess I'll say that. Like, if you break an oath, there's a good chance something really bad is gonna happen to you as a result of breaking that oath. But at the same time, they didn't have to make this oath, and it was basically like, if anybody tries to keep a Silmaril from them, then they're gonna kill that person, regardless of who it is. So, as you can imagine, there's some fuckery that comes from that. Like I said, they murdered Elwing's entire family. They're gonna kill her, so they take her sons captive. They don't want to kill children, but they can't let Elros and Elrond go, I guess. So they actually put them in like a cave that's behind a waterfall, and they plan on just leaving them there to die or to starve, I guess, because like nobody would be able to hear them because of all like the water rushing over the waterfall. So Maethros and Maglor put Elros and Elrond, these two little children, in this cave behind the waterfall, and they plan on just leaving them there to die. However, Maglor actually has a change of heart, and I'm not sure exactly how long that they left the children in this cave, but he goes back and retrieves them, and this is actually where Elrond's name comes from, Stardome, because he was found in a cave. It still doesn't sound great, but yeah, so Maglor ends up actually raising the twins as if they were his own children. Most people familiar with the text, I think, at least from what I have heard in like some of the podcasts that I enjoy, is that most people kind of agree that Maglor is like the soft boy of the Sons of Feanor. Like, he plays the harp, he likes poetry, like he doesn't really like fighting. So he kind of imparts some of those values into Elros and Elrond, I think. And his story is actually, I mean, he's probably the least asshole-ish of all of the Sons of Feanor. Maethros is also, like, not terrible, but he still does, they both still do terrible things, so, you know. But I think we could probably agree that Maglor is the most empathetic of all of the Sons of Feanor, because hurting people does, like, hurt him, and it makes him sad to do that. So he raises the twins. Maybe Maethros is involved, I'm not really sure. The focus of it is really mostly on Maglor, but the details of this are also a little bit vague, and I wasn't really able to find much clarification for, like, how long Elros and Elrond are actually living with him, or like if he lets them go, or if they just leave, because at some point Elros and Elrond just end up in Lindon. Like, they're in Lindon now. It's around the War of Wrath, so a lot of shit is going down. This is around the time when their father Arundel actually manages to make it to Valinor with Elwing to plead for the Valar to come help, because stuff has just gotten so bad with Morgoth that there's really nothing that, like, the free people of Middle-earth can do. They, like, desperately need the help of the Valar to come and deal with this issue before, like, he basically wipes out and enslaves the entire continent. So Elros and Elrond end up in Lindon, and this is where Gil-galad is ruling currently, and Gil-galad in the First Age is not the High King of the Noldor, but he becomes the High King of the Noldor in like the Second Age after the War of Wrath, because his father is killed. So the Valar come help. We can assume that Elros and Elrond were probably involved in the War of Wrath, because this is a battle that took about 50 years to complete. At the end of it, you know, this is when Beleriand sinks into the ocean, and really the only part of Beleriand that's left after the War of Wrath is Lindon. So after the War of Wrath ends, Elros and Elrond are both given the choice if they want to be counted among the men or the elves, and their parents, Elwing and Arundel, are also given the choice if they want to be counted, which I think is interesting, because Elwing is only like a quarter human, because her father Dior was the son of Beren and Luthien. Beren is human and Luthien is an elf, but she still gets the choice just because, since she has human blood in her. And this is kind of a theme that repeats, because even though she's not technically half human, Arwen also gets the same choice. So, you know, good for her. We like it when women get to choose. But I just found it interesting, I guess, what counts as half-elven, since it's a choice that is actually given to them by the Valar. I suppose it makes sense that they can choose that way. It's like a magical thing, I guess. I don't know. I'm going off on a tangent. Anyway, Elwing chose to remain among the elves, and Arundel chose to join her, basically, like he chose for her sake to also remain among the elves. And this is when they allow him to keep custody of the Silmaril that he used to navigate to Valinor, and his boat actually is what is making like the journey across the night sky, and you can see his star in the sky, the Star of Eärendil. So when Galadriel gives Frodo like the file of Galadriel with the light of the star, that's Elrond's dad. And Elwing is actually given a tower like in Aman on the border of the outer world, so that she can basically like watch him in the sky, and so she can be like the first person to welcome him back every time like he finishes like a journey and returns to land. And over the course of time, I think it's actually kind of cute, she learns from the seabirds that come visit her in the tower, like she learns their language, and then she also learns how to transform herself into a seabird at will, so that she can fly out to greet Eärendil when she sees him approaching. It's romantic. I like that. But anyways, Elrond obviously also chose to be counted among the elves, because we see him millennia later still doing his thing, being cool. But Elros didn't. Elros actually decided he wanted to be mortal, and when he made that choice, the Valar actually gave him the kingship of Numenor. So they allowed him to be king of Numenor, and he was actually the one who founded the royal line of the Numenorian kings. So all of the kings of Numenor and the kings of Gondor and the kings of Arnor are all descended from Elros. I also think it kind of adds just like a nice like extra layer to Elrond, because we now know that he's been like forced to watch essentially several people that he loves die over like the course of his lifetime. Especially, I can only like I'm an only child, but I can only imagine how emotionally devastating it must be to have your twin, someone that you've literally never been apart from for your entire life. They still live quite a long time, and then you just have to basically like watch this person who has been your other half just get old and die while you don't. It's really sad, and it's not even like the only person that this happens to, because his daughter also makes the same decision. So that is a thing, and he loses his wife later, he loses his king. I mean, we'll get to that, yeah, but you know, headcanon, Elrond has abandonment issues. I don't think we give him enough credit for like what tragic kind of character that he is, because he really does lose a lot of people that he loves. His brother Elros chooses the fate of men, and he goes on to become king of the like newly established Numenor, because the Valar gave this island to the Edain, or the men who helped defeat Morgoth during the War of Wrath, basically. So Elros becomes king there, and he takes on the new name and the new title of Tar Miniatur, starting like the tradition of how Numenorian kings are named. After the War of Wrath, Elrond actually becomes King Gil-galad's herald, and he lives in Lindon like well into the Second Age, serving Gil-galad. And there's sometime like earlier in the Second Age, this is when this dude that we may recall from the Sauron episode, this dude named Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, shows up, and he stops by Lindon, claiming to be an emissary of the Valar, sent to give the elves some instructions for how to make some cool rings that will really help their respective realms flourish and protect them, make them kind of a pretty reflection of the lands that they left behind in Valinor. So he shows up in Lindon first, and Gil-galad and Elrond really don't want anything to do with him. They think he's pretty sus. They don't trust anything he has to say, so they kind of like tell him to go away. They don't let him in. They tell him to fuck off, basically. And they also kind of send a warning out to some other people in their realm. I believe Celebrimbor was actually among them, being like, hey, this dude's kind of sus. Don't let him in because we think he's up to no good. And Celebrimbor was like, nah, man. There can't be anything wrong with this guy. He's gonna teach me how to make something really fucking cool. And as we know, Celebrimbor goes on to forge the Rings of Power with Annatar, and we find out later that Annatar is actually Sauron. Shocker. How could we have foreseen this? My goodness, how could we have known that it would go so wrong so quickly? Oh wait, we did know. So yeah, Annatar slash Sauron shows Celebrimbor how to make some really cool rings, and they forge the rings for the men and the rings for the dwarves and all that jazz. And then Annatar fucks off to go do his secret mission, which is to forge the one ring to control all the others. And while he's working on that, Celebrimbor actually forges the 3 elven rings of power, Vilya, Narya, and Nenya, without Annatar's input. So when Annatar slash Sauron goes on to forge his own ring, the Ring of Power, by himself so that he could, like, you know, master all the other ones and mind control them, he tipped his hand a little too early because the elves realized immediately what was up and stopped wearing the 3 elven rings and hid them, you know. So he wanted to mind control them, but he couldn't because they were woke to this. They were woke to his plan, and they hid all the rings. This pissed off Sauron, so he was like, well, if you're not going to use them, just give them back. If you're not going to use them, just give them back. And the elves were like, no, fuck you, we're not giving them back. So Sauron was like, fine, I'm gonna invade then. And so that's what he does. He spends some time gathering forces, and then in 1695 of the Second Age, this is when, like, the war of the elves and Sauron really starts popping off. King Gil-galad actually sends Elrond out from Lindon with a force in an attempt to help defend Eregion, because Eregion is where Celebrimbor is, and Sauron wants Celebrimbor so that he can figure out where the hell the elven rings are. I mean, and the other rings too, but, like, we don't really care about them, do we? I'm kidding, of course we do, just it's not for this episode. So, unfortunately, Elrond arrives too late to help save Eregion, but honestly, Sauron's forces were kind of overwhelming, so it's a good assumption that Sauron's forces were too powerful anyways. The fact that Elrond got there too late is probably for the best, because he honestly might have been killed and overrun if they had actually, like, been there in time. So what he ends up doing is he tries to help gather some survivors from Eregion to lead them somewhere safe, and Galadriel's husband, Celeborn, is actually one of the people that he meets up with, because Celeborn was leading a sortie, I would say, like, against the forces of Sauron in an attempt to kind of, like, buy time for people fleeing. So they ended up joining up. And unfortunately, Sauron does manage to capture Celebrimbor, but Celebrimbor actually had the foresight to send the elven rings away before being captured. So he sent one Nenya to Galadriel, and then he sent Gil-galad, Vilya, and Narya. And unfortunately, Sauron did end up killing him, but he didn't give up the location for any of the elven rings. He gave up the location for, I want to say, most, if not all, of the other rings of power, but the elven rings, no, he didn't give up the elven rings. So they stayed hidden, and during, like, this whole war between the elves and Sauron, the elves made sure that he didn't find their rings of power. So when Elrond came with his forces to try to help the survivors of Eregion, those fleeing, he ended up leading a retreat northward to try to get these people away from Sauron's forces, and the only reason that they managed to actually get out safe was because a force of dwarves led by Durin III from Moria actually came and attacked Sauron's rear flank. So because they were attacking him there, it distracted him enough. He had to deal with that so that the elves were able to, like, escape. They went northward, and this is where Rivendell is first kind of becomes a thing. Like, it starts out as another refugee camp basically for people fleeing Eregion, trying to get away from, like, the destruction that Sauron's armies is causing. They start out founding this, like, refugee camp, and over the next couple of years, Elrond really, like, manages to build it up into a stronghold that people have been flocking to as Sauron's armies are kind of just, like, starting to overrun Eriador, which Eriador is like the area of the map that Rivendell is in. Rivendell is also known as Imladris. It's named after what it sounds like, and it's shaped like itself. It was located at the foot of the Misty Mountains at the edge of this like really narrow gorge of the River Bruinen. And a main approach to Rivendell was actually fording this river, the Fords of Bruinen, and that's actually where Frodo crosses after being stabbed by the Nazgul when the river gets flooded and washes the ring wraiths away. That's where this is. Because of Rivendell's location, it was actually, I covered this in like the Elven Realms episode, but since this is the Elrond episode, I'm gonna cover it again. Rivendell's location was actually, it was naturally defended by the geography around it, which made it an excellent place to turn into a stronghold. Elrond actually managed to defend Rivendell from Sauron's siege for several years, basically trying to keep Elrond's forces trapped and locked down in one place so that he wouldn't be able to lead in any attacks on the rear of Sauron's forces when Sauron goes to try to take out Lindon. But luckily for the elves, the siege is actually finally broken after a couple of years by the arrival of the Númenóreans. And they broke the siege in 1700 of the Second Age. The Númenórean king that led the force that saved the elves was the 11th ruler of Númenor at the time, I think. So, for scale, this is several generations have passed since Elrond's brother Elros has passed away. So the Númenóreans come in at like the big damn heroes they are, and they save the day. They defeat Sauron, like they completely defeat him. This is when Sauron starts to be like, you know what? Those meddling Númenóreans, I need to do something about them. So this is where his like hatred for the Númenóreans kind of starts to take root. But after Sauron is defeated, a council is held. And this is like a precursor to the White Council, because there are people there who are in the White Council in the future, but like the wizards don't show up until the Third Age. So it's like kind of like the White Council diet version. I put the teeth in first because I like them. I just think they're neat. I have so many different pairs of vampire teeth, but these are the easiest ones to use right now because I can just pop them in and take them out when I'm done. But I love them. They're so much fun. This council is when Gil-galad actually appoints Elrond as his vice-regent in the region of Eriador. This is when they also have the discussion and agree to basically let Rivendell remain. This is when Rivendell is like officially recognized as an elven city settlement, that it's not a refugee camp anymore. It's actually recognized officially as like a new city for elves to live in, and Elrond is in charge of it now. Basically, good for him. I mean, he was in charge of it the whole time, but now it's official, so like you get like a plaque or something, I guess. Gil-galad also gives Elrond the ring Velia in order to help Rivendell prosper, but there's like some conflicting information on when he actually does that. So he might have given it to him at this point, or he might have given it to him like later in the Second Age. I'm not actually sure, but I'll go into the Velia a little bit though. Velia is the Ring of Air. It was described as having a gold band with a blue sapphire set in it, and it was considered the most powerful of the three elven rings. Though its powers weren't like explicitly stated, we can infer based on like what we've seen from the other rings is that it probably had some healing abilities, especially since Elrond was known for being a very renowned healer. It probably had some protection abilities. It helped Rivendell flourish. It might also have given Elrond some control over the elements, and especially in regard to defending Rivendell from invaders, since like we know that he summoned that torrent of water that floods like the fords of Bruinen when the Nazgul were pursuing Frodo. It's also probably around the time of this first White Council that Elrond might have met his future wife Celebrian, because this is probably the time frame when she and her mother Galadriel had traveled to Imladris actually looking for Celeborn. There's like a quote that's basically like Elrond loved her in secret, so I don't know if that means like he saw her and it was love at first sight, but he didn't want to like come off too enthusiastic or aggressive or what, but we can assume this is when that he first at least meets her. And closer to the end of the Second Age, after the fall of Numenor, so like thousands of years later, Rivendell is actually where Gil-galad and Elrond marshaled the armies that became the Last Alliance, which we know is when they went to siege Mordor and Barad-dûr and do like direct battle with Sauron. So the Last Alliance marched to Mordor in 34-31 of the Second Age. Elrond served as King Gil-galad's herald once again, and this part is like the really cool opening scene when we see like all these armies doing battle in Mordor. This is actually known as the Battle of Dagorlad. The siege on Mordor actually takes years for them to actually do it, and they don't even really have the greatest results ever, because I believe it's Sauron that actually breaks the siege, because he comes out swinging after a while, and Gil-galad and Elendil, who is the leader of the Númenóreans in exile, basically. So they're the Númenóreans who saw some of this crazy shit that was going on in Númenor when like the fall was getting ready to happen. So like they were the ones who stayed loyal to the Valar and to their friendship with the elves, and Elendil is the king of them. And he is also the father of Isildur, whom you may remember. And if you don't remember, I'm going to refresh your memory right now, because Isildur is the one who cuts the ring off of Sauron's hand after Gil-galad and Elendil have basically like dueled him into submission. So this duel is like pretty rough. They managed to defeat him, but they both die in the process of fighting Sauron. So Elrond basically has to watch Sauron like kill his king, who has been super cool to him this whole time and given him a bunch of neat shit and titles. And you know, I imagine they're probably pretty close friends. Like, elves live a long time, so yeah, Elrond is forced to watch as Sauron basically grabs his king by the face and then just with the heat of his hand burns Gil-galad's face off, which is pretty gnarly. So that happens, and then Isildur comes up and basically grabs Sauron's hand and cuts the ring off his finger after this. And this is when Elrond and I believe Círdan the Shipwright also are like, hey man, you should probably destroy that. And Isildur is basically like, no, I'm not gonna destroy it, because this asshole just killed my dad, and he also killed my brother during the siege, so this ring is gonna be Weregild for their deaths. And Weregild is basically like, if you have a family member die, that's like the ransom that people pay you for the fact that they like caused the wrongful death of one of your family members. So he took it for that reason. So like I want to dispel some of the Isildur hate that we get in fandom, because yeah, he didn't destroy it, but like it wasn't quite so cut and dry just because he was a greedy asshole. It was there were factors that went into it. So hashtag Isildur did nothing wrong. After Sauron's defeat, Elrond returns to Rivendell, and with the ring Velia, Imladris like really prospers. He is able to use the ring now because Sauron isn't around anymore trying to cause problems with the Ring of Power. So the elves are able to use their rings of power without fear, because they're not harmful as long as Sauron doesn't have the Master Ring to try to mind corrupt everybody. So I couldn't find like a consistent source to back this next part up, but I remember there being some discussion about whether or not Elrond should have been made king after the death of Gil-galad. Some people think he should. I've also heard some opinions that Galadriel should have become queen, but neither of them ended up like trying to claim the title. I'm assuming because potentially by the end of the Second Age there really weren't enough Noldor left in Middle-earth to really like be worth declaring yourself the king or queen of. That's kind of the impression that I got. So after Isildur's death in the second year of the Third Age, that's when Elrond begins the tradition of actually fostering Isildur's heirs in Rivendell. This is also around the time when he actually receives custody of the shards of Elendil's sword Narsil, which is the one that Isildur used to cut the ring off of Sauron's finger. So Elrond has a hold of that as an heirloom for Isildur's heirs, and he also gets a hold of the Ring of Barahir, which you may remember from my Finrod episode, the significance of that being a treasure that Galadriel's elder brother Finrod originally gave to one of the houses of the Edain as a token of friendship for them saving his life. Elrond also kept this scepter called the Scepter of Annúminas, and this is kind of like supposed to be the representation of the realms of Gondor and Arnor being basically like under one bloodline, since the kings of like Arnor kind of died out. That probably will be good to cover in like a Witch King episode, though. If I do that, I don't know, we'll see. He does eventually pass it along to Aragorn, but not until Aragorn is crowned King Elessar. It's way later in the Third Age. So in year 109 of the Third Age, Elrond marries Celebrian, who is Galadriel and Celeborn's daughter, and they have twin sons, Eladan and Elrohir, in year 130 of the Third Age, and then they have a daughter, Arwen, in year 241 of the Third Age. Celebrian means Silver Queen in Sindarin, and she probably had silver hair like her father Celeborn, just based on the name, but I wasn't really able to find a whole lot about physical descriptions about her. And as far as we know, the White Council was actually hosted fairly frequently in Rivendell, and we see it finally officially formed in year 2463 of the Third Age. This is also when Saruman becomes like the leader of the White Council. So this is when we see like the wizards finally start to be playing like a bigger role in Middle-earth. And the White Council was like originally actually formed to try to find a way to deal with like the growing power of the necromancer at Dol Guldur. We know now that necromancer is actually Sauron, but at the time they weren't positive. And then also in addition to that, the White Council was really just trying to help coordinate protection and like resistance of the free peoples of Middle-earth from Sauron's tyranny, because Sauron is trying to amass forces again. And the listed members of the White Council that we know of are Saruman. Obviously, he was selected as a leader by vote, I think, and Galadriel actually wanted Gandalf to be the leader of the White Council, but Gandalf, I don't think, really wanted to be, and so they ended up picking Saruman instead. Obviously, probably because Saruman was, like, known to be a very knowledgeable lore master, like, that was his thing. Books and lore were, like, his thing. He liked to know shit, and he liked to know all about shit. I think probably also because Saruman originally served the same Vala that Sauron did when they both still lived with the Valar. I could see them kind of assuming that he would understand how Sauron's mind worked based off of that, but obviously, as we know, that kind of backfired in the long run. So yeah, we have Saruman, and then we have Gandalf, we have Galadriel, we have Elrond, and we have Círdan the Shipwright, and quote-unquote other lords of the Eldar, but those are the ones who are named. You can kind of count Gil-galad among them, but like he was in the original meeting, not the ones in the Third Age, obviously, since he died. And, you know, Sauron melted his face off, but... The White Council met again in 2851 in Rivendell, where Gandalf actually urged them to make an attack on Dol Guldur after he finally discovered that the necromancer was actually Sauron returned. But Saruman, what do you know, overruled him because he was trying to find the Ring of Power at the time, and he didn't want them to like be able to interfere with him trying to do that. So he was like, oh, well, no, we don't really need to worry about this. The Ring of Power obviously like fell into the river and was washed out to sea a long time ago, so you can just ignore this problem. It'll be fine. It's not like he can become powerful again without the Ring of Power. And that's obviously wrong, because if they hadn't destroyed the ring, then Sauron would have won the War of the Ring. He didn't need the ring to win, but Saruman wanted it, so, you know. Obviously, he's lying about it. Unfortunately for Saruman, though, by this point, Gollum had actually, already picked up the ring, so Saruman never actually was able to find it. Haha, suck it, Saruman. And then, in 2941, the next White Council was called. This is when Gandalf really goes hard trying to convince the Council that they need to take action against Dol Guldur, because Sauron is still managing to amass forces that threaten the Free Peoples, despite his lack of the One Ring. So, Saruman was wrong, wow, my god. But I guess they just think he was wrong, and they don't, start to be sussy of him, because they still, continue to include him in the White Council shit. So, they finally all agree to go to Dol Guldur. But by this point, Sauron's pretty much ready for them, and so when they come to beat his ass, he just flees back to Mordor. And then Sauron actually officially declares himself 10 years later, so in 2951, the council has to meet again in order to discuss the Rings of Power. Saruman keeps trying to convince them that the One Ring is gone and that we don't have to worry about it. And unfortunately, this actually comforts Gandalf a little too much, because by this point, Bilbo actually has picked up the ring. This is when he found a magical ring in the caverns under the Misty Mountains, and after doing the riddles and stuff in the dark with Gollum, so he has the ring now, and Gandalf was like, where'd you get that? But apparently whatever it was that Saruman had to say kind of comforted Gandalf into a false sense of security about it, so he was just kind of oh yeah, it's just a quirky little ring, it's not a big deal, and, you know, well, we know how that ends up. So, White Council stuff. Back in 2509 of the Third Age, I'm kind of jumping around. I'm trying to keep a flow kind of with this script, so that even if I'm jumping from a different date, I'm hoping it will be a little bit easier to follow. In 2509, Elrond's wife Celebrian is actually waylaid by orcs on her way to visit her parents in Lothlorien, and she was, quote, tormented by them. There's very little detail about what was actually done to her. We do know that she received a poisoned wound in captivity, and her sons Elladan and Elrohir do actually manage to rescue her, and Elrond does heal her physically, but emotionally and mentally she never recovers, and it's literally only a year after they rescue her that she decides she's going to Valinor, and it just bounces because she cannot handle being here anymore, and she needs to be in a place of pure healing and light, and Valinor is pretty good for that, so that's where she goes. After that, we can take another box for Elrond's abandonment issues, I guess, but Elladan and Elrohir actually start hunting orcs obsessively after their mother's terrible experience. It is actually in Third Age 2933 when Aragorn's father Arathorn is killed, and this is when Elrond actually takes Aragorn into foster, like he's been doing with the other heirs of Isildur over the centuries. Elrond names Aragorn Estel when he takes him in, which means hope in Sindarin. So Aragorn actually grew up in Rivendell. He was actually completely oblivious to his lineage for the longest time as Elrond was fostering him. And it was on his 20th birthday when he returned to Rivendell after being in the woods, I guess. And that's when Elrond was hey, by the way, you're actually the heir of Isildur, and I have this sword for you that is all broken up in chunks right now, but eventually we're gonna reforge it once you're worthy. He gives him the sword, and he gives him the Ring of Barahir, but he doesn't give him the Scepter of Andiminas yet because he hasn't earned it. So that's when Aragorn finally like discovers like his destiny. From what we know, he was actually like super tight with Elrond's sons. They would hunt orcs together, you know, and all that. But he never actually met Elrond's daughter Arwen until later, because when Aragorn was growing up in Rivendell, Arwen was actually living in Lothlorien with her grandparents. So Estelle didn't meet Arwen until later, but he does eventually meet her when she's come back, and they fall in love, and Elrond takes it surprisingly well. I mean, especially considering everything that's happened. He basically tells Aragorn that the choice is ultimately going to be up to Arwen if she wants to make that decision, but regardless of the choice she makes, one of them is going to have to suffer being separated from her forever. And he also does like tell Aragorn, like, look, you cannot marry my daughter until you become king, because she's very important to me, she's very important to our people, and she's not gonna marry somebody that doesn't deserve her, essentially. So Aragorn has to prove himself worthy of Arwen's hand in marriage by becoming king and reuniting like the two kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor, because my daughter ain't gonna marry nobody unless he's the greatest, the coolest, and the most amazingly worthy guy. She ain't gonna die marrying some grubby ranger with no lands or titles. And then we have 2941 in the Third Age, and this is when Elrond actually hosts Thorin Oakenshield and his company on their way to reclaim Erebor from the dragon Smaug. This actually happens on Midsummer's Eve, so while they're there, Elrond actually examines these really cool weapons that Thorin's company found in a troll horde. They discover that these weapons were actually forged in Gondolin, which, as we know, is the hidden elven city that Elrond's father was actually from originally. You know, that was like before it fell to Morgoth's forces. And then Gandalf and Bilbo actually stop by Rivendell to chill for a bit after they finish the quest, when like they're on their way back to the Shire. And that meeting is also basically when Elrond and Gandalf agree that the necromancer needs to fuck off for good. Like, they need to get rid of him somehow. So when Frodo, years later, sets out from the Shire with the Ring of Power, he actually had already planned on stopping by Rivendell to get Elrond's advice, because that's just what people do. Like, people go to Rivendell to get Elrond's advice. So on the way there is actually when Frodo gets stabbed on Weathertop by the Nazgul, and Elrond is the one who later heals him of that wound. But as we know, like, he wasn't able to fully heal because of the type of blade that was used. But Frodo, like, he did pretty good for what he did. Actually, when Elrond heard Frodo was trying to get to Rivendell, he actually sent out riders looking for Frodo's group. One of those riders was a really cool dude that we know named Glorfindel. And Glorfindel is actually the one who finds Frodo's group. And when Glorfindel finds Frodo, he actually lends Frodo his horse to, like, speed him ahead to get to Imladris, because they're being pursued by ringwraiths. When Frodo makes it across the fords of Bruinen, that's when Elrond actually sends this deluge of water down through the ford that washes the Nazgul away. And then after Frodo is healed, that's when the Council of Elrond is held. We know the exact date, which is October 25th, 3018 of the Third Age. This is when the Fellowship of the Ring is formed. There are a lot of other things that were discussed at the council, but basically, like, what all happened was that a lot of people showed up to Rivendell, and all of them wanted Elrond's advice about some weird shit that had been going on, like, wherever it was that they were living. And Elrond is just at this council like, yeah, all this shit y'all are dealing with, it's Sauron. It's all Sauron. And see here, we have this ring that Frodo was kind enough to bring us. It's the most evil tool it ever created. It's a tool that we have to destroy it. It's bad, guys. Let's get rid of it, or Sauron's gonna take over the world. So no pressure. no pressure. As we know, the Fellowship of the Ring sets out from Rivendell, and then about half a year later is actually when Elrond sends his sons out to join up with some Dunedain Rangers that are actually Aragorn's kinsmen, and they all travel to Rohan together to join Aragorn's group when they walk through the paths of the dead. I know in the movie it's literally like just Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli, but in the book it was like a whole group of dudes showed up. I painted my mirror by accident. Oops. Need a napkin. That's one thing about this makeup that is a little frustrating because it's so watery, because technically it's airbrush makeup. If I dip the brush too far in, then this happens. So yeah, they all go through the paths of the dead, and then later on, after they've liberated Gondor from invasion, this is actually when they make the plan to take their army to like the gates of Mordor as a distraction, and Elrond's sons are actually like on board with that, and they are basically like, yeah, this is what our dad would have wanted, so let's get that distraction going, boys. And then after Sauron is defeated for good, that's when Aragorn is crowned king. That's also when Elrond basically escorts his daughter to Minas Tirith so that she can marry Aragorn at like his coronation. I know it's his coronation in the movie. Honestly, I don't actually remember if it's his coronation in the book or if that is like, if it's after his coronation. But yeah, so Elrond takes his daughter to get married and gives his blessing, and it's at this point that he also gives Aragorn the Scepter of Annúminas finally, because since, you know, he's now king, he's worthy of it, and worthy of marrying Arwen. And we also know after Sauron is defeated, all of the rings of power, like the elven rings, actually lose their power, so the elves could no longer utilize them to protect and nurture their own individual realms. God, that's fucking crooked, isn't it? This makeup you also really want to powder because it does stay on really well, but it needs like just a little extra layer of protection, because I mean every makeup does really. Like if your body paint doesn't, like if you don't need to set your body paint with a powder, then I don't trust it. Even if it says like it doesn't need it, I do it anyway. If it's the type of thing where you put powder on it and it flakes off or it messes up, then I'm not going to make that purchase, because I would rather have like a layer of protection like this than have to deal with sweating off everything. So Aragorn marries Arwen, and the quote is basically like, Elrond parted from her in great sorrow, poor guy, and he actually decided to sail across the sea to finally go to Valinor for good. And he actually left Middle-earth on September 29th, 3021 of the Third Age, and he took his ship west to Valinor. He was on the boat along with Gandalf, Frodo, Bilbo, and Galadriel, so other ring bearers. And this departure was actually what marked the end of the Third Age and the beginning of the Fourth Age. It's been such a hot minute since I've worn this to a game that, like, not super symmetrical. The last couple times I've done like the Valasleen design for this, I've done it really crooked. So rip. The Third Age ends. I think it's kind of bittersweet because, like, the passing of the elves is definitely the mark of the end of a beautiful part of Middle-earth's history. But I mean, Elrond does get to reunite with the love of his life, Celebrian, and we assume since she's been spending so many centuries in Valinor that she's probably recovered quite a bit from her trauma. We at least hope so. Poor girl. So they can finally, you know, live eternally in paradise together. And I think that's nice. When Elrond departed Middle-earth, he was like roughly 6,500 years old, give or take a decade, you know. And to put that in perspective, 6,000 years ago in our world, I think people were first beginning to domesticate horses and chickens. So elves live a long time, man. Anyway, this is the look. I'd really like to wear this again. Like, I really enjoy this kit because it's really comfy, but it's also like, I put a lot of work into it. Like, I made all of this myself. Like, this is hand stitched that I did this. Hand stitching myself. But wee woo. This looks terrible, but I'm not gonna fix it, so don't pretend like you don't see it. So, now that we've reached the end, it's time for a segment that I like to call Metal Music Monday. This is where I recommend a song from my metal library, Maybe we like the same music, maybe it's new to you. Either way, I hope you enjoy it. The song of the week is Dio Volendo Lo Faro by Fraser Edwards, and in keeping with like the last couple of weeks, this song also is a very high energy song. If you're looking for a bop, here's another one, basically. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed our time together. I know I really did, but even if you didn't, I appreciate you giving me the chance. If you did enjoy, I would love it if you left me a like or a comment, if you share my stuff, or even if you click that subscribe button. And until next time, Namaste.